Mr. Harrison was the kind of man everyone in town knew by name, not because he was friendly or generous, but because of his wealth and arrogance. He owned several businesses and believed money could buy him respect. On a bright summer afternoon, his shiny vintage muscle car roared down the main street of the small Midwestern town, only to sputter and stall just outside Jake's garage. The garage was nothing fancy, just a simple workshop with oil stains on the floor, shelves packed with tools, and the scent of grease that seemed to live in the air. Jake, a hard-working man with weathered hands and decades of experience, came out wiping his palms on a rag. He approached the car, recognizing instantly that the engine wasn't in good shape. Before he could even offer help, Mr. Harrison stepped out with his usual swagger, sunglasses reflecting the sun, and said in a mocking tone, "I've taken this car to the best in the city. None of them could fix it. Do you really think a small-town mechanic like you has a chance?" His words dripped with superiority. Jake wasn't the kind of man who got riled up easily. He stayed calm, nodding politely, but before he could reply, Emily stepped forward. She was only 22, with her hair tied back and grease smudges on her jeans from helping in the shop that morning. She had grown up working beside her father, learning engines like other kids learned books. Mr. Harrison noticed her and laughed harshly, shaking his head. "What's this? The mechanic's daughter? Don't tell me you think she can fix what experts couldn't." His voice carried a cruel edge, designed to humiliate. Emily felt her chest tighten at his tone, but she didn't look away. "If it can be fixed," she said softly, "I'll find the way." The crowd that had started to gather outside the garage murmured with interest. Some leaned against their trucks, others pulled out phones to record. Mr. Harrison smirked, sensing a chance to turn this into a spectacle. He tossed the keys in her direction with exaggerated flair. "Go ahead, then. Let's see what the little mechanic can do." His laugh echoed, but Emily's steady eyes didn't falter. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just about fixing an engine. It was about proving herself, about showing the town, and this arrogant man that skill wasn't measured in wealth or titles. Her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, whispering, "You don't have to prove anything to him." But Emily shook her head gently. She wasn't doing this for Mr. Harrison. She was doing it for herself, for the garage she loved, and for the pride of her family's work. She tightened her gloves, rolled up her sleeves, and slid into the driver's seat to listen closely to the silent engine. Every sound, every shudder, every tiny vibration told a story. Emily had learned to hear engines the way musicians heard notes. She listened for nearly a minute, then stepped out, opening the hood. The heat rose in waves as she leaned over, her eyes scanning the maze of metal wires and grease. It was a tangle of confusion to most people, but to her, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The crowd whispered and chuckled, some doubtful, others curious. Mr. Harrison leaned smugly against his car, sure that this young woman would fail within minutes. She reached for her tools, pulling out wrenches, testers, and a small flashlight. Each movement was deliberate and confident. She started tracing connections, tightening bolts, and testing the circuits. To the untrained eye, it looked like guesswork, but Emily's mind was methodical, sharp, and trained by years of patient learning. Sweat trickled down her forehead, but she ignored it, her focus locked entirely on the problem before her. The crowd grew quieter, sensing that something serious was happening, that this wasn't just blind tinkering, it was skill in action. Jake watched from a distance, pride swelling in his chest. He had always known his daughter had a gift, something beyond what he himself had ever achieved. She could see things differently, catch flaws others overlooked. As the hours passed, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. Emily never once faltered. She worked with a calm determination that silenced even the most skeptical onlookers. Mr. Harrison's laughter faded into impatient tapping, his confidence slowly beginning to waver as the impossible stretched into possibility. The garage lights flickered on as dusk settled, illuminating Emily's face as she leaned over the open hood. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand and adjusted a loose wire she had discovered buried deep in the engine system. Her heart raced with excitement. This was the flaw everyone had missed. It wasn't about brute strength or expensive tools. It was about patience, intuition, and knowledge. She carefully adjusted the connection, tightened the last bolt, and closed the hood. She looked up at her father, gave a small nod, and turned toward the ignition. The crowd leaned forward, holding their breath as she slid back into the driver's seat. The garage was silent, except for the sound of her turning the key. For a moment nothing happened, and Mr. Harrison smirked again, ready to gloat. Then with a roar that shook the night air, the engine came alive, smoother and stronger than it had in years. Gasps and cheers erupted from the crowd. Phones shot upward to capture the moment, and Jake's eyes glistened with pride. Emily stepped out of the car, standing tall, her face calm, but her heart surging with triumph. The crowd's cheer echoed across the quiet town street as the impossible engine came to life. Emily stepped out of the car with her gloves still on, her chest rising and falling from hours of work. The glow from the headlights reflected on her determined face, making her look stronger than ever. Mr. Harrison froze in place, his jaw tightening as disbelief settled in. He had mocked, laughed, and dared her with the certainty of victory, yet here he stood defeated by the mechanic's daughter. The silence in his expression spoke louder than any words. Emily didn't bask in glory or shout with triumph. She simply removed her gloves, folded them neatly, and placed them on the hood. The issue wasn't complicated, she said calmly, her voice steady but carrying weight. It was overlooked because people stopped paying attention to the small details. The crowd nodded, whispering in admiration. They saw more than a young woman fixing an engine. They saw discipline, patience, and brilliance in action. Her humility struck people even harder than her success. Mr. Harrison shifted uneasily. Jake stepped forward, his pride uncontainable, though his eyes watered slightly at the sight of his daughter's strength. He had spent decades in that garage, but in that moment he knew she had surpassed him. She wasn't just repeating his lessons, she was forging her own path. "That's my girl," he said softly, though the words carried across the crowd. People clapped and cheered again, some even recording the emotional scene. The garage, once an ordinary workplace, had turned into the center of an unforgettable memory that night. Mr. Harrison finally broke the silence, his voice quieter than usual, lacking the sharp arrogance it once held. "No one in the city could fix it," he muttered, shaking his head. How did you see what they missed?" Emily looked at him directly, her eyes steady and confident. "Sometimes it's not about the biggest name or the fanciest shop," she replied. "It's about listening, paying attention, and caring enough to find the answer." Her words cut deeper than the sound of the engine, striking at the pride of a man who thought wealth bought wisdom. The people watching murmured with approval, many smiling proudly at Emily's courage. Some whispered that she should open her own shop, others that she would one day outshine every mechanic in the state. For Emily, however, the moment wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about proving that she could trust herself. She had been underestimated, dismissed as just the mechanic's daughter. But now she had shown everyone, including herself, that she had earned her place. Confidence flowed through her, not in arrogance, but in quiet strength. Jake walked over and wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his rough hands trembling slightly. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered, his voice cracking. Emily leaned into him, smiling softly, realizing that the victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to their family, to every long night spent in the garage, every lesson learned, every struggle endured. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the story of what had just happened was already spreading through phones, social media, and word of mouth. By morning, the whole town would know. Mr. Harrison remained behind, his face pale with embarrassment. He had expected to humiliate Emily, to prove that money and city expertise would always overshadow small-town grit. Instead, he had been humiliated himself. Slowly, he cleared his throat and approached Jake and Emily. "I owe you an apology," he said stiffly. The words seemed foreign in his mouth, but they were genuine. I was wrong. Clearly you have a gift." His eyes lingered on Emily, searching for some trace of pride or arrogance, but she only nodded politely, refusing to lower herself to gloating. The car's steady hum filled the night air, as if mocking its former master. Mr. Harrison glanced at it, still in disbelief that it had been revived. He pulled out his checkbook, ready to offer a ridiculous sum of money for her work. "How much do I owe you?" he asked. Emily shook her head firmly. "This isn't about money," she said. "It's about respect." The statement stunned him even more than the repair. He was a man who understood the language of wealth, but tonight he was forced to reckon with values money couldn't buy. Jake looked at his daughter. With pride once more, realizing she was teaching lessons even he hadn't fully grasped. Respect, humility, dedication, these were the values their small garage had always stood for. Mr. Harrison lowered his pen, awkwardly folding the checkbook back into his pocket. For once, he felt powerless. The daughter of a mechanic had dismantled not only his broken car, but also his inflated ego. "Thank you," he said quietly, then turned and walked away into the night, his confidence stripped, his perspective forever altered. When the crowd was finally gone and the garage returned to silence, Emily sat down on a stool, exhausted yet fulfilled. The rhythmic ticking of the cooling engine was the only sound, a reminder of her accomplishment. Jake handed her a bottle of water and smiled with tears still lingering in his eyes. "You changed more than just an engine tonight," he said gently. Emily nodded, realizing he was right. She had proven herself, earned respect, and inspired everyone who had witnessed it. And though she was young, that night marked the beginning of her legacy.